Well, hello and welcome to another Wednesdays in the Word. I am Pastor Autry and I am super excited about our lesson today as we're going to take a journey through what is called the fifth gospel. And so in this video, we want to raise the question, exactly what is the fifth gospel? Well, hello, and thank you for joining us as this is a new study we're launching into entitled The Fifth Gospel. So glad you can join us. What is the fifth gospel? Well, very quickly, my wife and I, about 2 months ago, had the opportunity to travel to Israel to do a pilgrimage. It was actually my second time, and it was my wife's first time, and we traveled with a group of pastors called the Macedonian Fellowship, about 20 pastors. And the fifth gospel is an immersion experience. And the reason why they call it the fifth gospel is because the assumption is that you can read the four gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and still miss the real experience of the gospel, which is the fifth gospel. And so what is the fifth gospel? We actually traced and walked in the footsteps of where the master walked. And so we went to all the significant places where Jesus dwelt, where he lived, where he ministered, where he grew up, places where he had his spiritual retreat, places where he did ministry, places where he had his greatest debates and his great teachings. We visited as many of those places as we possibly could, trying to capture the experience of the gospel. And I can tell you right now, it was an amazing, transformative experience. And so what I want to do today, I want to share a few places that we visited because I obviously can't cover all of them. It was a 13-day trip and we visited so many places. I'm only going to be able to share a few for the month of July. We're going to spend the whole month of July on this fifth gospel immersion experience. So I want to share a few today, and then I want to focus on ones, at least focus on the ones for the rest of the month that really impacted me and hopefully and prayerfully will impact you the way they touch me. They're very biblical, right from the scriptures, and they will make a lot of sense. Okay, and so one of the many places that we visited on the screen right now, this place is called the Mount of Olives. And one of the things you will notice when you go to Israel is that it is a very mountainous, hilly region. And I mean, in this experience for us, we did a lot of walking and as much eating as we did because the food was absolutely amazing. We didn't gain a pound. We actually lost weight because we did so much walking, usually 2 to 3 miles a day. And usually it was uphill, sometimes downhill, but a lot of walking. And as you can see in this picture, this is a mountain. The Mount of Olives is the traditional place where Jesus ascended to heaven. And on this mount, as you can see, those are tombstones because the Jews believe, and it actually faces the temple wall, which I'll show you, the east wall. It faces the temple wall right there. And that's the Golden Gate all the way to the right because they believe that Messiah will actually enter to that gate. And when he does, there will be a resurrection. And so you have all these tombs, these tombs here where people are actually waiting and believing that Messiah will come. And you know, as Christians, we truly believe when Jesus returns, he will raise us from the grave and we will forever be with him. So I just thought that was very, very interesting to see that. And so that's the Mount of Olives looking into Jerusalem. This is the Mount of Olives behind me. I'm actually standing on the mount. That gold dome, that's the Mosque of Omar. It actually sits on the Temple Mount. And on the other side is the Wailing Wall, which many times Jews and Christians are praying for God to move and to restore Israel or to restore the times. This is the Chapel of Ascension. And it's believed that this is the very place where Jesus with his last place where he spoke to his disciples and gave the instructions to go into the world to preach the gospel. Or in Acts chapter 1, verse 8, you shall receive power when the Holy Spirit comes upon you. And so it's a small chapel. And one of the things you'll notice when you go to Israel is that whether the Greek Orthodox Church or the Catholic Church, they've built a church on it because they really have a reverence for sacred places. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's a good thing. And we'll talk about that in a minute. And so if you go inside here, you'll see there they have a space within the chapel that they believe to be the actual footprint of Jesus. And they take it, you see the candles there, they take it very, very seriously. And they really understand sacred places. Protestants, and if you're not Catholic or you're not Greek Orthodox, but you grew up maybe Baptist, or maybe you've been part of Baptist or part of Methodist or part of Presbyterian, Episcopal, that's Protestant. And Protestants, we just don't really appreciate the sacred places and those kinds of things, but they really take this very, very seriously. And so that is the Chapel of Ascension. This next one is called the Church of the Mount of Beatitudes. And this is the place, it is believed, where Jesus gave the Beatitudes found in Matthew chapter 5 in the Sermon on the Mount. That's another picture there. And as I said, they always build a church on top of it. Beautiful place, sacred place. What I love about it, they have the actual Beatitudes on tombs, on stones, on stones throughout the complex, just to remind you of the sacred, the holiness of the place. And I just thought that was great. And that was something that caused you to pause and to reflect what the Lord would be doing in your life. This is the inside in which you can come in, you can sit, you can pray, you can reflect. Many people read the Beatitudes there and they pray, and they're seeking a spiritual experience in the very place where Jesus is believed to have given the Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes. And here, right here, that's actually the text in Latin. That's what the Catholics, they read the text in Latin. A lot of their services are in Latin, and it's open to Matthew chapter 5 in Latin. And so that's the Church of the Mount of Beatitudes. This is the church of the multiplication of fish and loaves, where Jesus multiplied it. It's in all the Gospels. It's the only miracle other than the resurrection that is found in all four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, which is the multiplication of the fish and the loaves, found in every single Gospel. The only other miracle other than the resurrection that is found in every other Gospel. And then also, too, this is called the Church of the Multiplication of the Fish and the Loaves. And so what is the difference, you may be wondering? Well, understand the Catholics and the Greek Orthodox, they split. And so this one is the Catholic version. And about 200 yards away, you can actually walk from there to this place, which what we did. And it is a hill, of course. This is the Greek Orthodox one. And you know the difference because I believe it's 9th or 10th century. Don't quote me on this. But the Greek Orthodox and the Catholic Church did split over icons or the statues. And so when you go into a Greek Orthodox church, you will see pictures, but you won't see statues, you won't see icons. That's what they split over. Whereas when you go into a Catholic church, you will see the icons, you will see the statues, as they thought it was a way to help the worshiper to draw closer to God. And that was a huge debate to the point of separation. This is in the Greek Orthodox Church. I thought this was very interesting. It was just very open on the left. If you look there on the left, in terms of a space of worship, the focus in terms of really approaching God. But on the right, here's a picture of Madonna. And you will see this in many churches, that pictures of Jesus and Mary before the 4th century tended to be a darker complexion or of a darker hue, as you can see in that picture. Mary's darker, which she would have been as she was in the Middle East, or which would have been Upper Africa, because actually the plates for Africa go through the Sea of Galilee. So that portion of Israel is called Africa, actually. And then you look at Jesus, he's even darker. Here's another picture as well, where Jesus again has a dark complexion. And about 4th or 5th century, that's when the hue or the complexion begins to change as the West becomes the dominant church. And so now Jesus's complexion becomes more white and really is the dominant complexion that we see today. So I just thought that was interesting that the Orthodox would even keep that there. And some of those churches over there, in one particular church we'll look at, date all the way back to the 4th century as to being them. They've kept that church up. Yes, they've had some challenges, and sometimes they were taken over, but they've kept that church in Christian hands. And throughout the ages, as people would come and do pilgrimages over in the Holy Land. And so this next one is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And this is an important church because it's right outside the old city walls. And this is the church that is believed to house the very place where Jesus was crucified, where he was laid when he was taken off the cross, and where he was entombed. Now, there's some debate about the tomb, but there's very little debate about the cross. Many agree that this is where the cross actually took place. This church was actually built by Constantine, the Roman emperor, the one who converted to Christianity, which made Christianity a national religion in the 3rd century. His mother Helena was already a Christian. She actually traveled to Israel and found the spot. There was a pagan temple on the spot where Christ was crucified. They tore it down, and Constantine built this church in the 3rd, 4th century, and that church has been there ever since. Of course, there have been an exchange of control of it, whether in the hands of the Muslims or what have you, with the Crusades and all that kind of stuff. But throughout the years, they have kept control of that church. There's actually a number of denominations that control it. The two dominant ones are the Catholics and the Greek Orthodox. I think the Armenian Church has a hand in it as well. But when you go inside, as I'll show you here, that's the place. If you see the glass place out in front of it, that is if you were there, you'd see a rock place, and that's where the cross was put. And so what they've done, they've built an altar in which you must bow down to see the place where he was crucified, which I think that is wonderful. And so as you can see, that's the Catholic portion. Now, if you would go further to the right, you wouldn't see any icons, no statues, because that's what's owned by the Greek Orthodox. So I just thought that was interesting. But this is the place, and it's always crowded, because people have been making pilgrimages to the Holy Land for centuries. Really, since the 3rd and 4th century, Christians have been going to the Holy Land as a part of their faith, making a pilgrimage for that experience, something that would shape and increase their faith. There's a picture of Lisa there as she's kneeling, my wife, at the cross. And that's a wonderful thing. This is what houses the tomb that is believed to be where the resurrection actually took place. And it's also in the chapel. It's about a good 200 yards, maybe 150, 200 yards from the place of the crucifixion. Now, there is an alternate site that's held by Protestants that's about a couple of miles away, and many believe that's the cave. But this is where, for at least probably for about 13 centuries, that many have 14 centuries, that many believe that was the actual place where Jesus was entombed and where he was raised from the dead. Here's a better picture of it right here. As you can see, the thing is really big. It's massive, and it's a massive church. I mean, it's really huge, and there's a lot you can get in there. But basically, the church, I don't know if it has members or what have you, but the church serves to house these sacred places, and the way people approach it is just, they just have such a holiness and a reverence for the place. I just thought that was amazing. This is right between the place where Jesus was crucified and the place where Jesus was entombed, and many believe this is where he was taken off the cross and where his body was prepared for burial. And so that's an important site as well. I'm sorry, right here. So that's another way to look at it. And so that becomes a very sacred place as well, and it's very reverenced and very hallowed. And so that's just some of the places I want to give you a feel. And when Christians come there, and I want to just say a word here for a minute, they really, really approach these sites as being very sacred. Now, I get that sometimes you can take sacred too far of things, to the point of worshiping those items. I can get that, where it becomes a form of paganism. But I don't think that's always the case. I think there's a sense that there's a deep meaning. And you see that in the scriptures, because many times God would tell Israel to make a memorial, build a memorial here, so that you will always remember what God did here. When Israel crossed into the promised land through the river Jordan, he told them to take stones from the river and build a memorial as a reminder. And here Christians have always kind of captured that, because there needs to be something sacred, something that we cherish, something that we value as holy. And I think that's very, very important, because then it speaks to how we value relationships, how we value people. People are sacred, and we always ought to have something sacred in our lives. And so I think that's a really great thing to have. This is where I wanted to land my plane today. This place is called Caesarea Maritimea, and it is in the scriptures, and I'm going to show you in a minute, but it's not in the scriptures by that name. It's just called Caesarea. But trust me, if you've read the scriptures just a little bit, particularly in Acts, you've actually read about this place. This was one of Herod the Great's palace, and Herod the Great is the Herod in Matthew chapter 2 that tried to kill Jesus. That's that Herod, okay? And he built actually 7 great palaces, which really speaks to the heavy taxation that he had on the people. And many believe that when Jesus arrives on the scene and he incorporates "forgive us of our debts" in the prayer, it was because of the debts of taxation that the people were incurring, and which was too huge of a burden to pay. And Jesus understood that and knew that the people needed some kind of liberation and relief for God to relieve them of that. But if you look at even just this palace, this one right here, this is where he had his horse races. This was his palace. It was like a campus. We're not talking about just some, 30-bedroom house. No, it's a full campus. We're talking about wealth, excuse me, that is just unprecedented. And he had 7 of these. Matter of fact, one place he actually built a mountain in the middle of the desert called the Herodium, in which, because it was too hot at the ground level, he built a mountain so that he can be cool in the summer. And so that just speaks to the kind of wealth, and he got it by taxing the poor, taxing people, and they couldn't bear it. They lost their inheritance, they lost their land, they lost their businesses, and Jesus ministers or comes in that context. And so this is the Caesarea. This was Herod's private pool. Many believe that probably Herod Antipas, he was kind of the main guy when Jesus came along, and the one who would eventually send Jesus to Pontius Pilate. There were 3 at the time when Herod the Great died: Herod Antipas, Herod Archelaus, and Herod Philip. The region was divided into 3 sections, and Herod Antipas seemed to have had the most power. But this was his private pool. And he actually had this harbor actually built, and a lot of commerce came through here. And any ship that came through there, look, you had to pay the taxes to park your ship. So he was making money. He was making big, long green. That's what he was doing. This was one of the stadiums. Again, this is at his complex. He had a stadium. Now, it's been refurbished for modern use, and they do use it as a theater. They have concerts there. But this was one of his stadiums in which he would hold theatrical events, entertainment events, but also, too, he would strategize with generals. And it was situated in such a way where they can actually fill the bottom with water, and they can actually strategize battles at sea. Just an amazing accomplishment, and just breathtaking in terms of the wealth and in terms of the strategy. This is an inscription about Pontius Pilate. Now, I raised this because up until the 40s and the 50s, many scholars didn't even believe Pontius Pilate existed, because in extra biblical sources, his name just didn't show up. But his name definitely shows up on many of the archaeological sites here at Caesarea Maritimea. So we now know for sure, even though we knew the scriptures were right, but here we get the proof. And so that's one site right there. This one is Caesarea Maritimea, is where Paul appears before Agrippa, and he appeals to Caesar. So this is where Paul was in prison before he went to Rome. and he appealed to Caesar. So now, why is Caesarea Maritima so important? Well, let me show you other places it's in Scripture. If you use Acts chapter 8, verse 40, Philip here, he ministers and does work of evangelism all the way to Caesarea. Guess what? That's Caesarea Maritima right there. So he's doing ministry all the way up there in Acts chapter 8. If you go to Acts chapter 9, verse 30, you see here that Paul, when he gets in a little trouble, that's where they take him. That's where they hide him, and they protect him from the crowds in Jerusalem. If you go to Acts chapter 10, where Peter preaches to Gentiles, a Gentile soldier, Cornelius, for the first time, guess where he was? Caesarea Maritima. It doesn't say Maritima in the Scripture, but we know that's the place where he actually preached. When Paul comes back from his second missionary journey, guess where he stops? Caesarea Maritima. And that becomes kind of the port. It becomes kind of the place, the launching place, where apostles began to branch out with the gospel, and the mission to go forward with the gospel begins to take place. And so my point is, I just wanted to show you the many, many places where Caesarea shows up in the Scripture. Acts 21, when Paul comes he's headed back to Jerusalem. On his way, he stops at Caesarea Maritima, and Philip is there with his 4 daughters who are evangelists, and he's there. And Paul's held in prison there by Festus in Caesarea Maritima. Those are all the same places, and that's where he was held. And so my point is that was a very important place of commerce. It was a very important place of taxation for the Herods in terms of how they kept their income. It was an important place of travel for many of the apostles. It definitely was a major place for launching out into their missions. So when we were there, seeing the expansive campus that Herod had built and all the wealth that he had, and that would actually be the place where many of the apostles, particularly the Apostle Paul, would launch their ministry. And we're talking about into the Mediterranean Sea, and we're not talking about cruise ships here. We're talking about boats maybe 12 or 14 feet. And the danger that is just ridiculous to think that you can cross the Mediterranean in a 12-foot boat. The heart and the faith was just overwhelming. And so our tour guide challenged us to take our shoes off and to stand on those shores in the water and to be rebaptized in the mission of God. And here I just want to raise the mission of God. The Missio Dei is what it's called. Missio Dei is Latin for mission of God. And the mission of God simply means that God is already in the world working. The question is, will you and I, the church, join God in his work? He's in his work. He's doing his work with the gospel, evangelism, discipleship, and justice. And the question is, will the church, who is called to join him in this work, will we join him? God is a sending God. God is a mission-oriented God. And it was just so moving to me that I was kind of repurposed and recommitted to this call on my life, that we are called to join God in the mission, the Missio Dei. Just a couple of thoughts here that I want to share. David Bosch, he's big on this. He says, mission is not primarily an activity of the church, but it is an attribute of God. God is a missionary God. That's who he is. He's a missionary God. And so for me, it became a time to rededicate myself to evangelism, to discipleship, to outreach, to justice, to the gospel, to being light in darkness, to going into all the world, to preach the gospel, to bring people in. And that's what the gospel is, because we're in a day where there's a secular version of the gospel that says, you know what, God's going to take care of you. God loves you. God's going to meet all your needs. This Santa Claus gospel. And I'm telling you, it's not the gospel. It is not the gospel of Jesus Christ. It surely doesn't mean that God can't bless us, but he blesses us for a purpose. He blesses us with a goal. He blesses us because he's calling us to join him in his mission in the world. And there's so many issues, people who don't know Christ, people who are suffering. Just think about all the people who are suffering as a result of Roe v. Wade and how we can just be there for people, regardless of your position. People need to be supported and ministered to. There's so many opportunities to minister in communities and those who are suffering with hunger and in immigration issues and just the gun issue, all that kind of stuff. Just many opportunities. Because I truly believe God is already at work in those spaces. And the question is, will we join him? And so just some questions to kind of wrap this up for you to think about as we close on Caesarea Maritima. Number one, what are your thoughts about the fifth gospel immersion experience? Is there something there? Is that a pilgrimage that you'd want to do sometime in the future? Number two, did any of the places thus far inspire something in you? Did you sense the sacred? Sense of the places? I just think that's something that's lost in American Christianity. What was your sense of it, and how many Christians have come from all over the world and they treat those places, they wait in line for hours and they treat those places as holy and sacred, and how we need to return maybe to those sacred places. What are your thoughts about missions in general? And sure, it doesn't mean that you have to go, but you sure can be a part of supporting those who are going. Christ Community has always supported individuals in missions around the world in so many ways, whether it's the gospel, whether it's some kind of outreach project, which of course has the gospel in mind. We have always done that. We've always been in Africa for as long as I can remember. We've partnered with already an organization where we're trying to do a women's conference over there at least every 2 years, and God is blessing that. And so we're committed to that. We're committed to making sure that we carry this gospel abroad to people in need. And even here at home, in terms of justice and all the different issues, voter registration and all these issues, particularly with all the suppression that we're experiencing today, we're committed to influencing the world with the gospel of the kingdom. And that's what we're going to commit to. My question to you is, what are your thoughts about the mission? Do you sense that God has called you on a mission? Because yes, he's called every Christian on a mission. What are your thoughts about missions and Christians today? Do you think Christians sense the call of God? Do they sense that God is already working in the world? Or is it more of a secular Christianity that simply waits for God to do something for us without us ever serving the purposes of God? I sure would love to hear your thoughts in the chat there today, and that would be great. And then finally, what does the missional call look like for us today here in America, in the Dallas and the Richardson area? Sure would love to hear your thoughts in the chat, what you think and how we should be moving. I think this is serious. I surely was impacted. I have redoubled my efforts to be committed to the gospel and spreading the gospel as much as possible. Very prayerful for opportunities to continue to share that. And my friend, I hope you would join me as well, and we can do this together. God bless you, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.